You are listening to a free version of the Majority Report with Sam Steeder. To support this show and get another 15 minutes of daily program, go to majority.fm, please.
The Majority Report with Sam Steeder.
It's Tuesday, September 11th, 2018. My name is Michael Brooks, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, on the screen, please, Darnell Moore, author of No Ashes in the Fire, Coming of Age, Black and Free in America. This is a pre-record that Sam did about a week ago. Very good interview. Also, we will be taking you into the fun half. It's, of course, the 17-year anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks on Manhattan, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., the precipitating events for a global crime spree that continues. It's also the anniversary of the 1973 CIA-backed coup in Chile. A somber day for many, but not all, and I'll explain that in a second. Jeff Sessions urges immigration judges to show less sympathy in a court system already riddled with inhumanity. The Trump administration wants to make it easier to release methane into the air, and doctors give no reason for a third of opioid prescriptions, a new study finds. CNN, fake CNN, shows that Donald Trump's approval ratings are in free fall. He's down to 36%, which in political reality is good news for us. In overall world reality, the fact that 36% of Americans approve of this guy is disturbing in and of itself. Women, minorities, and first-time candidates drive Democratic House hopes, and white men are the minority of Democratic nominees. Ahead of the primary day, the Cuomo administration has offered sweeteners to get a new bridge opened after a major embarrassment that occurred just days ago. Maybe the broader team around Cuomo and the state Democratic Party, good at smearing Cynthia Nixon, not so good at bridge safety. Republicans have become silent on deficit reduction as Mitt Romney pops back up into the public discourse with a totally pointless, irrelevant call for probably just going to be more austerity. There's going to be, it looks like, a second meeting with Trump and the leader of North Korea, and Hurricane Florence is headed to the Carolinas. All that and more on today's Majority Report. The crew is here. Jamie Peck is in the co-commander seat.
Hello.
Matt and Brendan are on the ones and twos. And it's the anniversary of September 11th. I think particularly in New York, it's something that it's real for the country. But, I mean, this is real in the way that if you walk by a firehouse in Brooklyn, more likely than not, you'll see a shrine to a first responder that died going in to rescue people. I have a memory of it being in Massachusetts and hearing it on the news in the morning, and at first sort of being like, that's weird, and then, you know, it really quickly becoming obvious that it was a terrorist attack. Do you guys have memories of this?
Yeah, I was in a meeting of the recycling club, actually, when I found out the news in West Hartford, Connecticut in high school. And then everyone went to the cafeteria and just started watching the news. And then the second plane hit, and it was obviously really fucked up and crazy.
Where were you guys?
I was in art class. I was doing like ceramics. I was making a car.
That's cool
thing, and we put it on in the TVs in the corner of the room. and I think football practice might have been canceled. I'm not sure, but then the one thing I do remember is cars lined up around the gas stations.
Cars lined up around the gas stations.
Yeah,
People
panic
thought
buying gasoline.
Thought the gasoline was going to run out.
Yeah.
Brendan.
I think we had like morning recess or something like that. And I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey, and a lot of people's fathers and mothers worked in downtown Manhattan, and they sent us all home. And I remember like the memorials and things thereafter being like particularly like kind of chilling. Yeah. So I mean, you know, it was for this region. It's something that's never going to go away.
No, it's a real thing, and I think that, you know, even though obviously it was used to advance just a catastrophic global agenda. I've been back in the sort of research mode for an illicit history of the war on terrorism for TMBS, and I mean, everything wrong that could have come out of that event did, but it still obviously was a horrific, terrifying, awful, and just savage event. And those of us who might be critics and dissenters of America's response in terms of foreign policy still are somber about it. There's a guy who seems to have a little bit of a different approach to this, and maybe he's just trying to pep us up. Here is Donald Trump. This is a photo of him in Pennsylvania. He's with arriving in Jonestown. This is, of course, close by where Flight 93 crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The passengers took over that plane, as far as I understand, and actually they basically tried to commandeer it, and it crashed, and they prevented another attack. And here's Trump. He's in mode. Yeah,
the one that matters is me. I'm the only one that matters.
Helicopters. The Secret Service guys are like, what the fuck is the matter with this guy? Melania's like, don't even ask. I'm not even going to explain, Ski.
I'm not here. She's just been pretending she's been invisible for the last 6 months.
I'm not here. My invisibility cloak. I'm wearing my invisibility panties. I'm not here. And lest you think Donald Trump was being a little cavalier and maybe, you know, look, maybe the fake press caught him in like a weird moment, and really what he was doing was actually making a really somber gesture. Here's his commemoration tweet that dropped at 7:58 a.m. Eastern Standard Time this morning. 17 years since September 11th. And that's it.
Exclamation point.
That is the quote. I'm going to have to do, could you imagine 8 years since September 11th? Exclamation point. Here I'm in Shanksville. What's up, baby? Jonestown. What's the matter, Michelle? Why you look so somber? Come on, woman. Come on, baby girl.
Fired up, ready to go.
He puts on some, he's like, well, can't we play some Mal Green in the parking lot? I want to dance.
Going to Shanksville, baby.
Going to Shanksville. Good job, Devils. You took one of them down, but the rest hit. Law Akbar. All right, let's go get this speech on. Okay. And then, of course, after these very weird, discordant memories, Trump went and did the other thing that he's great at, besides being an absolute narcissistic jackass, which is fear-mongering and smearing Muslims.
A piece of America's heart is buried on these grounds, but in its place has grown a new resolve to live our lives with the same grace and courage as the heroes of Flight 93. This field is now a monument to American defiance. This memorial is now a message to the world. America will never, ever submit to tyranny. Since September 11th, nearly 5.5 million young Americans have enlisted in the United States Armed Forces. Nearly 7,000 service members have died facing down the menace of radical Islamic terrorism.
So, first of all, I thought the grace comment was always funny, coming from Trump. I don't know whether or not we'll submit to tyranny, but the threat of tyranny does not come from Yemen or Pakistan. It comes from
I don't know. Have you seen their pickup trucks?
Yeah, I've seen those pickup trucks. And as scary as they are, it comes from your bloated self, Mr. President.
It's also weird just to, like, they need to fill up the content of that speech with something. So you name the amount of soldiers who have enlisted.
You name the amount of soldiers that have enlisted.
And not any relevance to, like, what good that's done us. Or,
No.
like, the safety of the world in general and, like, people's living standards abroad. Like,
No, it's a numbers game. Everything's a numbers
Yep,
game.
it's like when that columnist whose name escapes me currently, the best of all possible worlds guy,
Steven Pinker.
probably listed the number of troops we have and the size of our army as one reason
Mike Allen,
why
Axios.
things why actually
Mike
things
Allen.
are only getting better. And I was like, that's an interesting interpretation of what's better. Also, Spencer Rapone made this point when he was on our show, which is that this sort of incredible amount of pageantry around the troops and sort of blind jingoistic support for American foreign policy and conflating that with supporting the troops. He says that that's really kind of a recent since 9/11 type of thing, which I'm sure it existed in some form before that. But yeah, that hadn't occurred to me.
it was, I think it may be because it was more democratic anyway, right? Like now it's, everybody knew somebody because you had the draft maybe. Like the draft might have had something to do with that sort of thing. I'm not sure. Like you have
Things
to
really
force it a bit
got
more.
amped up after September 11th. There was a massive amount of sort of popular militarism after September 11th.
And in popular culture especially.
It's made
Definitely.
sporting events so much better.
Yeah, right. It's made sporting events so much better. Today's show is brought to you by the Sierra Club. If you like the stories you hear on our show, we think you'll like the Sierra Club's new storytelling podcast, The Land I Trust. Season 2 of The Land I Trust is out now, bringing you storytellers from across the western U.S. who share their experiences in harvesting, protecting, and living with the 4 natural elements: water, fire, wind, and air. The series has 14 tales of individuals across the western part of the country as they share their tales of climate change, clean energy, and everything in between. Each year, the Sierra Club visits a different region of the country for a new set of stories. Season 1, Stories from the American South, talk to musicians, families, farmers, and climate refugees, helping to move the South from coal ash pollution to a brighter, cleaner future. You can listen to The Land I Trust at beyondcoal.org/stories. That's beyondcoal.org/stories, or on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out Season 2 of The Land I Trust today. We will be right back. We're going to have Sam's interview with Darnell Moore. That'll be about 35 minutes or so. And then the crew will be back to take you into the fun half.
We are back on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program author Darnell Moore on his memoir, No Ashes in the Fire, Black and Free in America. Welcome to the program, Darnell.
Thanks for having me.
You know, and I got to say, I should start off. We don't have we don't interview many folks who have memoirs, but in many respects, there is a real, I think, political element to your book, and one that is also, I think, founded in a certain sort of individual sense of freedom. I mean, let's start with that. When you talk about being black and free in America, this is let's talk about being free first, and then
Sure.
we'll work our way back.
Yeah, and first I'll say, too, that it is a memoir, but it is both an account of like a personal narrative, but it's also, I try to write out a type of social history, too, so that one can understand the life world and through which I came, and also a lot of what I call in the book the unseen hands at work shaping not only my life but my community, which absolutely had everything to do with public policy and a history of place and space and everything else. But with regards to freedom, I want to be clear that does not negate or tries to give I talk about freedom as existential freedom, as a type of ability to see oneself fully, to come to an understanding of oneself as a Black queer person in the U.S. In this particular context, and to love that self, to love one's full self. But that is also not a way of not attending to the various forces that can limit one's sense of self, one's freedom, one's well-being. So doesn't mean that racism is still not operative. It doesn't mean that antagonism because of sexual identity or gender expression is still not limiting the freedom and lives of some. It doesn't mean that class stratification does not always sometimes keep people from succeeding and this economic disenfranchisement. What I was getting at there is what it means to not love oneself because of the various messages that I've been taught about Blackness, about queerness, and to finally get to a point where I can look in the mirror and to love the reflection staring back.
And we should say you grew up, and we'll talk more about this, but obviously you grew up in Camden in Philadelphia. But, I mean, just staying on that notion of that freedom being, a sort of unshackling, I guess, the human bondage on some level that comes with being Black, being queer, and growing up in the context in which you did. What is... I mean, what does that position you? Does it position you to be able to come to accept yourself and love yourself in a broader society where being Black, you are constantly bombarded with messages to not love yourself, and being queer in both the Black community and the wider community, same message. And what does it do for you once? I mean, and obviously it implicates you, personally. But that level of freedom, can you address these broader societal issues that you talk about in a different way?
Absolutely. So, the one thing I want to say is the stories that I write about in the book aren't exceptional in that they are mine. I'm talking from my perspective and those of some of the people around me. But it's a truth that, that there are segments of people, whether they be Black or LGBT or economically disenfranchised, who daily survive through racism and homophobia or trans antagonism and so much else. That said, part of what I was trying to do in the book is to make a point about how individual strength, or what I talk about in the book, I talk about queerness as magic and individual triumph and freedom. While that is the sort of the type of stories we love to hear, like the ones that lift up an exceptional character who somehow, despite one's troubles, made it through and made it successful, so that the answer is go out and follow the path that this person did and pull yourself up by the bootstraps because you can do it too, right? I was really interested in exposing how even with strength and brilliance and magic and all that I talk about, it's the conditions through which one comes to be. And I'm talking material conditions, public policies, the political forces, neighborhood blight, the type of real estate moves that had redline communities. If those types of things aren't attended to, then I don't care how strong a person can be individually. the reality that they can succeed or make real in their dreams and actualize their goals is that much harder. And that's what the book is really about. My message was, yes, some of us survive the fires that come metaphorically there, right? But some people don't. So let's figure out how any of us implicated in the making of fires in other people's lives and how that could limit individuals' freedom to be not only alive, but to be alive and to flourish.
What do you think? I mean, and you know, I want to get into some of the details of your life, but what do you think? Because you know, this issue, obviously, of the of material context, fundamentally putting up more roadblocks and some that are insurmountable, and some that I would imagine mix with the individual in different ways, right? That it's not just simply some type of like, we're going to, narrow the bandwidth of people who will succeed here. There's got to be some type of interplay too, where there are moments in one's life and obstacles that one faces in one's life that somehow mix with other experiences in that life that you know make one more lucky, I guess, or have some type of advantage to survive through that type of situation. And what do you think that was in your life?
I mean, I had community and a family who, despite our lack of wealth, was rich in love and care and support. I did not go without a community of care who helped me to navigate life, who pushed me when I had goals, who supported those goals, who would give their last dime. I come from the type of family that would never let one of their own go without a bed or a place to lay their head, without food to eat. That to me is a modeling of a type of collective care that often goes without in our society in the U.S. right now. I mean, that to me is radical love. It means a practice of ensuring that the least of these especially, that people don't go without. It's a practice of hospitality, of opening the door. And by family, I mean my biological family and also the people in my community and lives, teachers, mentors, folk who were fighting in my community to ensure that I had access to things in school systems that often sometimes lacked that access. So one can't succeed unless they are within a context and within a community where there are people fighting to ensure on an everyday basis that their ability to thrive is that much more easier.
And we should say you grew up in a family of 11, and we'll talk about your father and then the other experiences you had. But I mean, presumably, right? There are kids growing up contemporaneous with you who may have had access in some respects to that same community, right? Or, I mean, how, because that's no guarantee even then, right?
Right. I mean, there's no guarantee, right? I mean, we all make different choices. We all get exposed to different things. Our life worlds are vastly different. So there is no guarantee. But what we can do is commit to doing.
I'm sorry, Darnell. I'm sorry, we're losing you a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's no real guarantee, right? With regards to how any of us are to go about living our lives. But what we should do is to ensure that folk have as much access as possible to the resources and tools that they need. I happen to be an inquisitive child. I was in a family that supported that inquisitiveness, and I also realized that my story, so I also, I came out as gay to my family. They love me, and they always have, and they supported me. There are people, though, who don't have access to family structures that are so open, right? I've worked with young people for a long amount of time who disclose their sexuality to family members, and they got put on the street. So I also want to be clear that this is what I mean by individualism is the optic through which we ought to sort of gauge success. Like we have to think about the communities through which young people or anybody exist, and access to spaces of care and communities of care that allow them to succeed.
So let's talk about the title, "No Ashes in the Fire," because I mean, it's obviously it's metaphorical, but it also it relates to a specific event that you were subjected to at age 14.
Sure. Yeah. So it is. Thank you for catching that. It's both metaphorical and literal. At 14, I was picked on a lot because of my gender expression. I got called names for acting quote unquote girly or too feminine, and was one day after school was coming from the store and some neighborhood boys surrounded me and physically assaulted me. And in doing so, one of them took a gallon of gasoline. Actually, it was a gallon of like a milk carton that was filled with gasoline and emptied that on me and tried to light a match. But somehow the wind, the elements, took the flame out. So it's the title is a reference, a literal reference to that. There was no ashes in the fire because there was no body to sort of be laid bare, no body that was destroyed by what could have been a fire. But it's also a metaphor about what it means to survive, to live Black within a context of a country for whom that has always been on fire with regard to Black people here. And what I mean by that, the fire is a metaphor for the various type of structural forces that try to impede not only Black well-being and progress, but even life. So it is my way of speaking both to a sort of specific incident, but making a statement about what it means to survive despite in the face of oppression and let me be really clear, public policies and laws, actions and trends that attempt to thwart Black people's lives and well-being.
Talk about the implications of when you first became aware that your father was abusing your mom.
So I write in a book about the intimate partner violence that my mom suffered at the hands of my father. And I talk about that as a means of, one, exposing what my mom had to endure as a Black girl she was 16 when I was born, raising a child. So I tried to illuminate that not only was she hit by the fist of her partner, literally, but she was also hit by the fist metaphorically of the state. I mean, she suffered a lot. She made minimum wage. I remember one time she went to the municipal welfare office and literally walked into a glass door. If that wasn't like a striking metaphor, I don't know what else is. In so many ways, her life examples what Black feminists like Kimberly Crenshaw coined. He coined the term intersectionality, which we hear a lot, which is about the interconnected forces that not only define sometimes, but also limit the sort of life capacities and progress in Black girls and women's lives. Her story illuminates that. But with my father, I also wanted to figure out what was the forces that shaped him. He was 15 years old when I was born. And it did not occur to me until I was writing that he was a child who was attempting to raise a child. And all I kept thinking is, who taught him what he knew about fatherhood and manhood and boyhood? And I'm assuming that some of those messages was about him, about, real men being strong and head of the home and demonstrating their power through their physical and sexual prowess. And part of it was coming to a point where I could humanize him, not only see him as a monster who did harm, because he did, and we held him accountable for that, but as also in writing his life on paper, it brought me to a more expansive understanding of him as a human being who did wrong things, but also who had been socialized to believe that some of those things were right, I remember talking to my mother and asking how could she forgive him, and she said it's because I don't only see him for the bad things he's done. I remember the good things he did in my life, like feeding her when she was hungry and protecting her when they were kids, and they were kids. Right. So, by the end of the book, it was important for me to wrestle with him. He died. My father passed away at 55 while I was writing the book, and his death also gave me time to think about how, for the most, a big part of my life, I had only characterized him as a monster. But writing about him helped me to deal, or at least to paint a broader picture of his humanity, both the beauty he was able to bring about with his hand and as much as the violence. And I think that it was a transcendent moment for me, but it also made me realize that we all have the capacity within us to do both good and bad, and we do. And that, I can't lift him up as the big bad monster and not also evaluate the extent to which I have to look at the monsters in me too.
And you also deal with that notion of I guess toxic masculinity and how it permeates. I mean, how just. I want to talk just a little bit more about that, sort of like in the context of the black community coming out as gay and having at least a positive response from your immediate family. But broadly speaking, I mean the challenge that's involved, like what I mean, you've touched on intersectionality as well, but this is like. It sort of goes beyond what the I mean, I guess from a personal standpoint, what does that like? I mean, do you disaggregate those two things in your
I do.
Yeah,
I do. So like, it's important for me to say, the black community is not more homophobic than any other community. I often say the laws that made sodomy real. That some of those laws weren't overturned until recently, within the last sort of 2 decades. Legislation, these were ratified by state bodies. Okay, we exist in a context of a country that, through its laws, policies, and practices, and also ideas, has propagated antagonism towards LGBT people. That is not at all specific to black people. We exist within the context of where religious institutions and or Christian ideology folk are not within the church influence such laws and influence such ideas. I mean, evangelicals are not just black. We have white evangelicals, Latinx evangelicals, a type of evangelical theology that exists upon homosexuality and transgender experiences as being sinful. This is not germane to black people. The same thing with toxic masculinity. And I always say that America as a country, as a society, has propagated an idea of a masculinity that's preferred. Hence, we have a person in the White House who is a sort of perfect example of what toxic masculinity looks like played out. Right. But the reason why Trump is voted into the White House is because that display of toxic masculinity is as American as apple pie, and people are attracted to that. So that being said, I make those points to say that the problem of antagonism towards LGBT people, masculinity that is a type of violent masculinity that is about, the meaning of women and femfolk and somehow viewing women as property that can be touched, our locker room talk and all these things are problems for the country, whether you're black, white, and whatever. Now, what I will say, though, is that to be black and queer or trans and or economically disenfranchised is to fight against multiple arrows at once, to protect oneself against multiple arrows at once. So I'm not only, the rainbow flag is not just the one element of the fight, right? Like freedom to be queer is not just one element of the fight. At the same time, you may be impacted by racism, and if you're a woman, you may be impacted by sexism, and if you're queer or trans and living on the streets. So this is where the intersectionality comes in. that like even within notions of LGBT progress, if we're not thinking about racism or sexism, then we do ourselves an injustice because we're on multi-pronged issues and they can't be won with single variable tools.
Does just to circle back on that notion that things like toxic masculinity, things like anti-LGBT sentiment is not by any stretch an exclusive purview or of the black community, but is there? As you're just talking, and it does get filtered through the broader society, but does the relationship of black people to American society, because of the way that black people have been devalued in our society, when those elements filter through that lens, do they mutate in any way? Is the importance of that toxic masculinity? I guess maybe Donald Trump is like presumably about as far removed from that as possible, and maybe he's a perfect example of that. It's really not that different in any fashion, but it just strikes me as I guess I'm just curious if you have a sense that the importance or the pressure involved in being, more masculine, broadly speaking, might have more prominence if you are living in poverty, whether you're black or white, or
Yes. I hear what you're saying. So part of it is like thinking about the history of race and racialization and gender in this country. So, the one thing is you have to remember when black folk were brought here as enslaved objects who were considered things, we do realize that that black folk were not even considered fully human, but property. Gender is a thing that is, things aren't men or women, things are things, and that's how we were seen in this country. And I think that that's important to note, that when we talk about masculinity and its toxicity, that if we don't talk about it within the context of a history of racialization and dispossession in this country, then we do ourselves a disservice. To your point, there are historians like Evelyn Higginbotham, who's from Harvard, who talks about the politics of respectability as one example. And what she was really talking about in her work and assessment of middle-class black women within black people within a sort of South during the civil rights movement within the church was about how some of them tried to compensate for the dehumanizing view that white racists had of them in the Jim Crow South by overly accommodating for things. So in other words, there was a way in which they would say things like, we have to be respectable, right? We have to, I know they don't think we're fully human or we're worthy of having equitable access under a Jim Crow state, that we don't deserve to be drinking at their water. They're looking at us like monsters. But if we go out here and show them that we're just as smart, that we dress just as fine, that our families are just as quote unquote together, right? Then we can be seen as being on equal player field. And this is what I hear you saying, that sometimes the response to the failure of a full society to welcome and to create equitable space for people is to somehow overperform or overcompensate. What I will say, though, the quick point that folk always say is well, of course, you have the black church. That's, this is an example. This is sort of a rationale for homophobia being more present in the quote-unquote black community, or hip-hop as a site of toxic masculinity. And therefore, this is seen as evidence that black folks somehow maintain that. But part of what that does is sort of grounded in a type of cultural pathologization. This idea that black people, because they're black, somehow end up, more overly and masculinized and more homophobic than others. The point that I'm trying to make is that if we don't think about the context through which this country thinks about masculinity and manhood and who was considered real men before black folk were considered anything human, and think about the context through which we get these messages and how those messages filter through all of the things you just said, then we do ourselves a disservice.
Right.
But I think you're right in saying that, like, that in a context with which one has to contend with all of these prevailing ideas about what it means to be something like a traditional family, for crying out loud, right? Then you do sometimes try to overcompensate by filling in the blanks for those ideas, if that makes sense. So I am a student of history, and it makes sense to me.
And it's also, it also strikes me as being, this is the one, I guess, attribute of an elevated social hierarchy that you have access to, right? Mm-hmm. At least I'm a man, and so I'm going to go to that well hard because.
Oh yeah. Yep. And I talk, and I write about that in the book a bit, right? Like, and how, but part of what I think is the answer is to deviate from that, is to understand that as a process and to figure out what it means to be different. I now say, like, I'm not interested in being a better man or a non-toxic man or a man who's not performing toxic masculinity. I am trying to be a better human being. Right. You know what I mean? Who's freed from all of those boxes, which for many can be cages anyway. And by cages, I mean, these notions of manhood and masculinity that are prison cells for people. And I don't always think does more harm than good sometimes.
Let's talk about you're an activist in the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm curious as to your perspective on how the movement has had to react to this sort of different era where from when it first emerged.
So the movement for Black Lives, like any movement, it shifts. Movements shift and they contort, and they, if organizers are paying attention, will shift things according to what the needs of the people are and which the movements are representing. So, Movement for Black Lives, which is a contingency of a variety of different organizations across the country, and now really across the world, who are interested not in a racial justice, transformative racial justice that not only just includes the ending of racism, but of so much else, sexism and economic exploitation and much else. There's so much work being done. There's a Movement for Black Lives policy table that includes several dozens of organizations and people who have created policy recommendations and a policy agenda and platform that can be utilized, particularly in a moment with a lot of the changing political landscape. There's electoral roundtables and coalitions that are rethinking what candidacies can look like at both the local and regional levels. That's been at work. I mean, the recent work of Stacey Abrams is a perfect example of that. So many people involved in that work are also involved in the Movement for Black Lives. St. Louis is another region, geographical example. Chicago, people have been elected. Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. A lot of the folks there who are been elected or platforms that have been created has largely come out of that work. Alicia Garza, who is one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter Global Network, along with some colleagues, started the Black Futures Lab, which has created and sparked one of the first efforts of its type, a Black census that is a tool that is aimed at Black constituents across the country to look at how Black people are faring differently based on their geography, age, gender, sexual orientation, so that type of information can be disaggregated. So it isn't just about assuming an assumption about what people's issues are, but looking at and asking specifically about what those issues are so that policies can then be crafted in response to them. So those are just a few examples of the work that continues to be done right now, given change in administration and therefore the social and political landscape.
I mean, talk about though. I mean, but I guess I'm curious as to, and maybe in just a more general sense, right? That how having an administration that is both hostile in terms of practice, right? I mean, Jeff Sessions has basically said, we're going to unwind to the extent that there was any progress in getting police departments around the country to at least be aware and know that there's going to be there's the potential of like somebody from Washington coming and looking at what's going on here. Jeff Sessions has completely abolished that on one hand. On another hand, Donald Trump has basically said, hey, I'm going to normalize or, provide 30,000-foot cover for you to call the police on a black woman if you think she has a fraudulent coupon. Or, just like every day we get another video of like, and I don't know if that's a function on some level of more phone cameras, or if that's also a function of in smaller and less, I guess, urgent circumstances, people feel more comfortable expressing their racism. And
so part of what I wanted to say is that for a lot of organizers and for myself, so much of this isn't new.
Right. Now,
to the extent that it's publicly are sort of aired in the more, like the dirty sort of laundry is now being put out there for everybody to see. The type of, everyday actions, like every day we're almost seeing somebody calling the police on somebody, some white person in some neighborhood complaining about a barbecue or a child selling water, or like those things are the type of daily mundane microaggressions that so many people see all the time. And these are not surprising. I think what's surprising is the extent to which now larger blocks of the public are surprised by what seems to be an uptick in things that are really normal for a lot of folks.
Right.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a store and been followed. I went to an office today to give a talk at a law firm as an invited guest and was asked by the white attendant if I was there to make a delivery, right? Like, I'm not surprised then when, and I looked at him, I'm like, I said, I'm here to go to such and such law firm. Are you making the delivery? No, I'm not. But like, that is the type of everyday type of practices that some people are not surprised by. I say that to say like what we're seeing with the Trump and men is representative of a type of common experience set, right? White rage and responses to the backlash that comes as a consequence of that. The sort of the new KKK that doesn't have the hood but have a crop cut but can still carry a conservative flag and join a march. Those are things that people are very well aware of. So when we're talking about the movement for Black Lives, I don't think people are surprised in as much as they are having to just rethink what's necessary to do work today, given the context that we've been exposed to in terms of policy. That makes sense.
Yes, and that's actually what I'm asking about, right? I mean, one that is because yes, I think video cameras, the ubiquity of phone cameras has, I think, made white people more conscious of what black people have gone through on a daily basis for generations. But I guess what I'm asking about specifically is that last part, is that notion of like, I mean, look, if I was a healthcare activist, right, and I was developing policy papers for healthcare, my whole perspective has to fundamentally shift when we're just talking about like, are they going to get 50% cut on navigators? And so I'm asking from that perspective, with the idea of like the theory of change that BLM activists had. what's the process of sort of reorienting towards an administration that is totally hostile, right? As opposed to one where we need to find the right people and.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of reorientation that's done. So there's talk around, what does sort of allyship look like? Just as one example, the idea that large constituencies and blocks. How do you get to the people who see this as being okay, right? Like, how do you talk to quote unquote middle America, whatever that's imagined to be, right? Or how do we get progressive allies and anti-racist white advocates to work, for example, in a like this within their own communities to sort of undo not only the ideology but to work on public policy. There's a lot of reorientation. How do you think about sort of the connection between not just the violence that comes down from policing to something like reproductive rights? It means that because we do realize that the rolling back of like the possibility that Roe versus Wade can be, the attack on Title X, these are also issues. So what I will say is that the policy table has been clear at thinking about the interconnection between these things and realizing that it takes coalition. Does this make sense?
Yes.
That it isn't just about single variable, that undocumented folk, that is a part of the Black Lives Matter platform too. And it really is, right? Reproductive rights and women's bodily autonomy is part of this too. So I think the shift, or at least the overwhelming importance of coalition building, as in terms of a practice, like of a movement practice, but also what it means to think about policy making through coalition building is also another critical point, or at least a critical reorientation right now.
That's a fascinating point. Darnell Moore, author of No Ashes in the Fire, Coming of Age, Black and Free in America. Thank you so much for your time today. We'll put a link, obviously, to your book at majority.fm. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Welcome back. That was Darnell Moore, No Ashes in the Fire, Coming of Age, Black and Free in America. Really good book. We are going to head to the fun half, 646-257-3920 if you want to join us. I'm going to fire up the IMs in a second. Tonight at 7 p.m., we are live with The Michael Brooks Show. Doug Lane is the guest. We're talking about September 11th, Iraq, the financial crisis, and why Marx can allow us to reclaim the future. It's going to be sort of like how we got here and opening up our parameters of imagination through basically radical political analysis. Also, in a sort of mini primer on the history of the drone program. We've got shout-outs. We've got banter. We've got a very full post-game. Check us out if you haven't already. It's time, patreon.com/TMBS. Also, we're about 7 people away now from the first 7,000 subscribers on the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. We hit some of the same things, definitely, that you would follow on any good lefty political channel, but probably a lot more international stuff. And we are also closely monitoring the dork web, or the jerk-off encirclement.
The jerk encirclement.
The jerk encirclement.
The dark enlightenment is sort of, that's not really mainstream at this point, but that's sort of like the neo-feudalist,
right.
Fascists.
Or as I like to refer to it, the endarkenment.
The in-loserment.
Well, I actually taught Jamie, I don't know if you remember this, but darkle is a word.
Oh, yes.
It's the opposite of sparkle.
Corey Pine was revealing Peter Thiel's connections to the Dark Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Some really good reporting.
They
going back
did
to
an
like
election watch party.
Yeah. Hey, guys.
It's the jerk encirclement.
It's the jerk encirclement.
The dork enlightenment.
That's the thing. Peter Thiel is actually he's not trying to be a jackass on podcasts and try to look cool. He's just quietly, I'm just trying to create fascism. I don't need you plebs to like me because I'm better. I wish I could kill you with laser beams from my eyes.
He's working on it. He's drinking blood in his castle, and he's working on it.
I'm working on it. We got a lot to get to in the fun half. Jamie, what's up?
Well, this week on the Antifada, We dropped the first in our new series called History is a Weapon. Sean talks about historical materialism and how it can help us understand the world and capitalism and ultimately make the world better. We also have an episode coming out tomorrow with comedian Jake Flores, who you may remember as the guy who got visited by DHS when he tweeted jokes about ICE.
As I said, I mean, it was violence. We can agree to that, right? Do you remember that caller? That caller might be a contender, like a one-time caller who could be the dumbest caller
they might have
ever
repented.
had. Yeah. Okay.
Tweeting is violence. That's right, folks.
Right.
But yeah, we had a great conversation with Jake. He's a really smart guy, funny guy. We talked a little bit about humor. We had a little bit of a back and forth debate about that for a minute. We talked about how Jake became a socialist. We talked about the relationship between politics and art. All kinds of stuff. Oh, also he told a very funny story about Joe Rogan that I think we will probably release as an extra because it ran a bit long. But yeah, you want to tune in for that. Oh, and History is a Weapon. I shouldn't say this, but we're probably going to unlock it at some point in time. But, you know, if you want to listen to it now, you can give us money. And that'd be great.
Woof, woof. For the unlock. Woof, woof.
Literary Hangover this week, coming Saturday, I think it was a stretch for a drop. But
it was a stretch. I like that one though. I don't
understand it.
More.
There's all these Air America ones that like have cobwebs on them and like.
Yeah, I have no idea what woof woof means, but I like dogs, and I think of like a dog that's like excited. It's like, oh, woof woof, unlock the content.
That dog sounds very nonplussed.
Yeah, that's why it's sort of funny though. It's like
still
woof,
curled up on
woof,
the
whatever. All right, you're right. Didn't work.
Literary Hangover. We're doing Scarlet Letter on Saturday. LiteraryHangover.com / or Patreon.com / That's what Chili
that one worked.
Yeah, exactly.
No, tell it again. I'm sorry.
No, we're just doing Scarlet Letter. Patreon.com / Literary Hangover.
All right, guys. See you in the fun half.
Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good.
Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
Do.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. throw our hands up. Wow.
But Sam, I got to get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.